Hello and welcome to this episode of the Practical Creative Podcast, where I talk to my guests about the how and why of creativity. As an actor and artist, I've developed my own creative process, but I'm also fascinated by how others approach their work, comparing notes on how they manage their energy and mindset, how they think about their work, why they've chosen a particular material or process, and so much more. I'm Jeremiah Krage, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Kathryn Poole, an artist from Liverpool in the United Kingdom. I had the opportunity to speak with Kathryn after she was announced as the winner of the Jackson's Art Emerging Artist Prize in Drawing, and I am so glad that I did. Kathryn creates exquisite and highly detailed drawings that result from her fascinating process. It's a combination of the scientific method, an interest in memory, and roadkill. The subject matter may be somber, but Kathryn's approach is delightfully inquisitive and cheerful. Some of the topics we cover in this conversation include how she warms up before beginning work and maintains focus for sustained periods of time, managing time to create alongside a demanding day job, the difference between using roadkill versus taxidermy as a source material, the virtues of working in black and white, her thoughts on entering art competitions, and Kathryn's creative challenge for you to try in your own practice. I had so much fun talking with Kathryn and exploring her wonderfully distinctive practice. Our conversation is full of fantastic observations and practical takeaways, so please enjoy. Okay, so right off the bat, could you tell people who you are and what you do?
I'm Kathryn Poole, and I'm an artist from Liverpool who specialises mainly in drawing and printmaking, mostly of natural forms.
I'm fascinated by the choice of focusing on natural forms. What is it about that draws your eye or your interest?
I have a background in biology. I did an A-level in it, and I did 2 years at university, and I always loved the ecology modules the most. And I just love animals and birds in particular. So when I draw things, it's always been either drawn from life or from death, as in taxidermy specimens, and it just they just seem the most natural things for me to draw.
So what is it about birds in particular that attract you?
I think they're my favorite animal. They're just so beautiful, and their forms itself, like the structure of their wings and their feathers, the feather pattern is really beautiful, and it's really satisfying to draw in such detail.
You mentioned taxidermy, so where does that come in versus, say, doing drawing from life, sketching birds in a park or wherever else you might find them?
Well, they stay still, so it's a lot easier to do a detailed drawing from a taxidermy specimen, and you could really study them to such, like, I like obsessive detail. I like to really zone in on tiny bits of detail, and it's really difficult to do that with an animal full of emotion. So taxidermy specimens have just seemed like the easiest way of getting primary reference material to draw from, rather than photographs from online or whatever. I can take my own primary source material, and it's really interesting how they preserve them as well, because a lot of the specimens are really lifelike. I did painting of an owl the other week, and somebody saw it in my sketchbook and was like, "Where did you see that owl? It's really lovely." And I was like, "Oh, it's a specimen from the Liverpool Museum." And they're like, "Oh, I thought it was alive." And like, nope. Just looks it. They're very skillful in the way that they can almost reanimate the animals. And then on the other hand, you'll get drawers full of skins where they just skin them and put them in a drawer. It's a bit Texas Chainsaw-y.
Do you find a difference between those two bits of source material, working with something that is very dead and very evidently dead versus something that's been artfully, there's been an attempt to make it look lifelike and alive again?
I think there definitely is a difference. There's a difference in tone of the drawing that you produce from it, purely because there's a certainty to the skins, like that this is a dead creature, where there's an ambiguity to the stuffed taxidermy specimens, you can play with the audience perceptions a bit more, of like, is this a live specimen, or is this a live animal? I think like with some of my prints I did that because my hybrid series that I did, which were my lithographs for my BA, I worked from taxidermy specimens and I sort of stitched them through the drawing together. So I used like the wings of a jay combined with the body of a Goliath beetle and placed them together to create a new creature that could potentially be one of these animals you find in a, a drawer in a museum. So I think that gives you this scope for lots of creative possibilities in these specimens.
That's fantastic. So it immediately draws to mind that I'm sure many people have seen photos of old stuffed mermaids, which would be like the body of a fish and the head of a monkey, and
Yeah,
literally stitched together pieces of these animals. But you're sort of taking
yeah.
those elements and recreating them in a drawing. What is it about working with dead things that interests you? I mean, did it stem from just like, oh, the only way to get that detail that you want from a bird is to look at a dead bird, or is there something else that's drawing you to these deceased things?
Partly the stillness, but also I think it's very scary. Um, it's just scary. Death is scary. And the certainty of death is a frightening thing, and encountering it on a daily basis with roadkill or things like that through the media, through the news, it's um it's such an interesting topic to me, and I love reading about post-mortem things, like how they preserved bodies and how they preserved specimens. I love reading about, like, I've got a whole bookshelf dedicated to human anatomy or the plague or war art and surgery. So it's morbidly fascinating, and I wonder whether it, lots of people are fascinated and you get waves of. So I think people think that people are strange for being obsessed with it, but if you look back through the history of like the human culture, there's everybody has a morbid fascination for it. The Victorians with the memento mori, the hangmen, like in the culture of going to see executions as a live theatre event, the Roman Colosseum with the executions in there. There is a cultural fascination with death, and I think it's because we are going to die. And maybe by learning more or thinking more about it, we can stave it off. I hope so. I'm going to reanimate myself through a drawing.
Yeah, that opens up some fascinating question, because one of the things that I noticed from looking through your work and the way that you write about your work is the importance of memory. And I'm fascinated by why that becomes such a recurring motif and why that is so attractive to you. Because I think you write about memorializing some of the creatures that you have done studies of that have been roadkill, and that you are collecting observations and sketches and a whole host of material around them as a way of memorializing them. But yeah, and you've done this with I understand you're looking at doing this with people as well. What is it about that the
Yeah.
process of memory versus actually doing taxidermy? Because you could go down that road. You could try to you collect roadkill and try to make hybrids, or physically stitch them together or preserve them, but you've chosen very clearly not to do that, which then starts to move it into a process of translation. And so I'm just curious where the memory element comes in, and why is that more interesting to you?
I think because the memory sort of fixes it in my mind or in like the present as a sort of, it's a memory of it being alive rather than it in its death form, even though I draw from the dead roadkill. If I don't, so with one of my pieces, I drew an owl. I did an animation of an owl, and its wing was flapping in the wind, and it was dead, but it looks alive. It looks like it's like that boundary with the stuffed specimens again. It looks alive, so it's almost through drawing and making sort of like a tangible ghost of the creature, like it's still alive and it's still present. But yeah, I just there's something about the collecting specimens that I don't like. I like the idea that it goes back into the environment, so like a fox can have it for dinner or something like that. Something benefits from it rather than it just sitting on my desk looking weird and being sniffed by the cat.
Wonderful. I love the idea of a tangible ghost. That's just fantastic. What a wonderful
Yeah.
thing to be aiming for.
I'm going to write that down.
Great. Okay. So that then brings to the fore for me the question of your process then, because I do feel like you have a fascinating process that really brings together your interest in science and the scientific process of observation and note-taking, but combining it with a very artistic and creative expression. Could you talk us through a little bit about how you go about starting a piece of work or body of work, or how you start the process of a new drawing?
It always starts with primary reference material. So, say for the Owl and the Bypass Wildlife series, it started with my commute, and I got off the commute at a certain point and walked for sometimes about 10 miles, sometimes 5 miles. It depends on how much time of the day I had left, basically, how much light I had. And I'd look for roadkill, I'd look for things that I could draw. I'd photograph them, I would record, I'd take videos, make notes of the time and that I found the specimen, time of day, what day it was, temperature, whether it was raining, whether sometimes whether there was heavy traffic or not, but you can't really tell that from one sort of moment in the space, and just record as much as I could about the actual specimen, almost in a sort of amateur naturalist way, trying to sort of mimic what a scientist would do if it found like a new specimen in the wild or something, and then I create the drawing.
And would you do the drawing? How does the drawing work? Is that something over a period of time with numerous sketches that are done in situ, or do you take all of that material back to your studio and recreate it there? What is the process of actually deriving a drawing from those observations and those recordings?
So I do some sketches at the scene, but if it's in the middle of the dual carriageway, I can't do that because I will end up on the road as well. So I do sketches for the ones that I can, and then I bring it back, bring all my source material back, go through it, work out what is the most interesting sort of angle, composition, what's the most interesting composition, and then I do the drawing back in my studio, usually quite big. It's like a meter. Most of my recent ones are a meter tall, and I'll grid it first. So I used to measure each section, so like from the wingtip to the like the elbow joint of the bird, and measure that, and then I'd mark that out. But I found that gridding works really well.
And do you take photographs as well?
Yes. So I'll work from photographs. So I'll try and get. It's really quite funny to watch me as I'm trying to do it, because if it's in the middle of the dual carriageway, I'll have to wait for all the lorries to go past, sprint to the middle, take as many pictures as I can, sprint back onto the pavement, try not to get hit, and then repeat for however many birds I find. I'm surprised I didn't get the police called on me.
That's a fantastic image. And for example, I would imagine that you have quite a range of material to choose from on any given day. There's generally a fair amount of roadkill. Do you zone in on one particular element or stretch of road, or do you collect quite a lot and then go back and choose one? How does that process of selection or curation work?
I photograph a lot, and then I don't know why I choose the birds to draw that I do. I think I like almost feeling of wonder. I've never seen a tawny owl like alive in my life before, but the one I have seen was the dead one on the pavement. So I drew that because it was such a surreal experience. I thought as we was going past on the bus and I spotted it, I thought it was an eagle. It was so big. The wingspan on it is incredible. So I just got off the bus and like ran to it to video it and photograph it. And I think it's that moment of like this is strange. The pheasant that is the subject for death throes, they land in such incredible poses. It's like it's leaping through the air. And I do tend to draw the ones that are as whole as possible. Although one of my series, I visited the same bird over and over again. It was a duck, and I photographed it every week, once a week, and then I did a series of 3 from different stages of its decomposition, where it was like half of it was sort of laminated to the tarmac on the last one.
And the photographs you're taking are all in black and white?
Yes.
Do you do anything in color when you're doing these observations?
I do take a few in color, but I mostly work in black and white. I just think it helps focus the brain on the form. It helps focus your eyes on the form and the actual animal itself, rather than being distracted by the detail of the leaves or like the blue of the feathers or the iridescence of the feathers. I think that's distracting, and it makes it more beautiful, if you get what I mean, because of the color of the feathers of most birds are so beautiful. So if you focus on the form, it's more, and it sort of harkens back to the black and white photographs, or like it's almost like a romantic, nostalgic sort of effect as well, having black and white as opposed to color. Like it does link with my printmaking as well.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, is there a correlation between almost the starkness and the reduction? Because also from what I've seen, there's not a whole lot of shading. There's not a whole lot of tonal range. It's very stark, black and white, very high contrast. Did the printmaking come after the drawing? Did one come before the other, or did they coincide?
I only learned printmaking at university, so I was introduced to printmaking in my first year of university, and really, really took an interest in lithography, which is a sort of direct drawing method of printmaking. So it really lent itself to my drawings really well. And then I was able, with lithography, when you are finished with the stone, you grind it off. So you draw on a slab of limestone with grease, and then once you finish your edition, you grind that drawing off and you completely destroy it. So then your image, in my case, exists in the small edition I do, and it doesn't exist as the drawn object anymore. And I thought that was really interesting, how I destroy it.
There's also an interesting parallel, just to my mind, of in the same way that a bird that's lying on the road is slowly eroded away by the passing traffic until there's nothing left. Your image on the stone is going through the same process, except you're doing that yourself.
I'd quite like to film it, so I'd quite like to film the actual process of grinding the bird off. Do you know what I mean? So that I've got a documentation of that destructive process.
Why do you stay with black and white? Whereas both, when you're doing drawings, back in your studio, you could go back and add color, or when you're printmaking, you could as well go back and add color. But as far as I'm aware, you don't. Why have you kept everything in that black and white range?
I think there's a few reasons. I think I'm scared of colour because it does add an extra layer of complexity to an image. I think I love the look of my black and white drawings. I think it would change the way you read them if I added like a wash of watercolour to them. And I think I just see things easier in black and white as well. I get very easily, I've got a really bad attention span, and I'll get really distracted by things that aren't necessary to the drawing, and it helps me see if I keep it all in black and white. But I am trying to learn to paint with colour.
And how's that going?
It's good. It's a lot more expensive than just using one pen and a piece of paper. But it is fun. It's very, like, I do feel more free.
Do you feel that there's almost like a different form of expression or a different vocabulary that comes out because it's the medium is so different in terms of how it goes onto the canvas, the tools that you're using, and then there's also the color element.
Yeah, there's a lot less control, isn't there? And through that, I feel less of an obligation to be as detailed. So I'm gradually, slowly loosening up and being more expressive, and letting things happen. I don't like mistakes, but I'm letting little tiny accidents stay because I can't get rid of them with paint. And it's sort of forcing me to be, but I think it is good to learn to draw just to get your eye for the tonal range like as good as you can get it before you start applying color, because then you've got one element of the drawing process done, and you know you're proficient at it before you try and add another element to it.
And when you're painting, are you sticking with the same subject matter or are you exploring other material?
I've been painting a lot of birds recently, and I started to learn my watercolors by painting my dad. So I've done lots of portraits of him, filled a sketchbook with portraits of him, and it was really lovely. It was really like painting the tones of the skin. Like human skin is really, really beautiful. They've just how much like flesh you can make it look like. It's enjoyable.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've got so many questions for you. I think we can go in so many different directions because I'm fascinated by both your physical process and your thought process. But I'd like to zoom out a little bit and ask some broader questions that fit around that. So the first one is, how do you manage your time in terms of having time for your creative work?
I work well. It's gotten a lot better recently. So I've moved from a job where I was 5 days a week to a job where I'm now 4, and I think I'm learning to manage my time a lot better. I have to be very strict with myself because I do get so easily distracted. So Fridays and the weekends are when I have to just sit down and just work. And I think if you're doing something that you enjoy, which I do, this is what I love to do. It's a lot easier to keep yourself um strictly on task. I can't. I haven't got the willpower to work after work. I just go to bed about 5 o'clock. I'm just dead to the world. But on the weekends, because it's my only time to do it, you just have to make use of what time you have.
So do you keep office hours, like your strict studio hours, where you are at? Well, actually, okay, let me back up. Do you have a dedicated space to work in? And is that in your home or is it elsewhere?
Yeah, it's in my bedroom. So I've got a dedicated desk that I work at that's really nice and big. And I do sort of keep office hours. I try to work from 9 till at least 5. Sometimes I'll go over, and I won't let myself have lunch until I hit a certain goal point, or I won't let myself have dinner until I hit a certain point. So I'll be like, oh, finish painting this wing, and then I can have something to eat. And I think that's a good. That just keeps you in check and stops you from getting distracted.
That's great. Okay, I really like that idea of setting goals to achieve. So then there's a clear marker for, okay, yeah, now I can stop.
And food is a brilliant goal. What an incentive.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
can eat if I finish this drawing. If I don't finish it, no food for you.
And when you do take a break, say to eat, when you come back, do you find it in any way difficult to get back into the work, or can you just jump in where you left off?
No, it's my attention span again. I do find it difficult. I have to sort of shut things off. If I put my I listen to podcasts or audiobooks as I'm working.
Hmm.
So if I put that on, I don't let myself listen to them outside of drawing or painting. So that's another form of reward. I've got very strict control of my impulses. So if I put that on, then I'll settle into it. Okay. and I'll zone out.
And when you start the day, the same question, is there anything that you do to help you get that focus and to get started in the work? Is there anything else you do to sort of warm up or prepare for the day's work?
I've got a little dumbbell next to my desk that I do a couple of like reps with just to loosen up, because I will be sitting at my desk for hours without stretching, and I do have terrible posture as well. So I'm like Gollum sat at the table just hunched over. So I do that. I have a cup of tea, and I like to watch videos of people painting or different like techniques that I've never tried, and I think it's really useful to learn from them. So I watch a bit of that with my cup of tea, and then I'll just set up and get ready, shut everything else off.
Brilliant. Okay, I really like that, actually, watching someone else work as a way
It's
of,
inspirational.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, and it's also cueing your brain. It's saying, yeah, okay, now we're going to do that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so when you're in that work mode, what kinds of questions are you asking yourself as you're going through that process, if you do at all?
It's usually very technical ones. So I'm thinking about angles and sort of like, yeah, it's mostly angles and proportions. Like, have I got that as far away from that? Is the density of the tone in that area dark enough? So I'm constantly reassessing certain areas. So you do have to have quite a good level of focus on what you're drawing as well, to ensure that it's cohesive, basically, and it's as good as you can get it to look. But I'll also, with podcasts I listen to a lot of history ones and a lot of murder ones, obviously. So, and it's good to keep your brain. They pose lots of interesting questions, so I do think about some of those. I listened to a really good episode of a history one about the Eastern Front of World War Two, and it just makes you. It sets the tone well for drawing a dead animal to listen to, mass murder. It puts you in the right frame of mind of being quite morose and morbid and sad.
Okay, so that begs another question then, which is, do you end up needing to do something completely different in order to change your mood? Because if you are if you are encouraging a morose, morbid sort of outlook or tone quality to your emotional or mental state, does that become in any way problematic, something that you have to work against to then go out and interact with the rest of the world?
It can be unhealthy. So, like, again with the birds, I tend to, when I let the cat out in the morning and I have my cup of tea, I sort of sit outside when it's warm enough, stand outside in a blanket when it's not. And we've got brilliant trees at the back, so I just watch the birds and sometimes take pictures of them in the garden. That, birds and the cats can't go wrong with that. But you do have to be careful, because you can get into the like, it's a heavy topic to think about. It's very sort of, and you can't obsess over it too much. I don't think I'm too much yet. I only make all of my work about it.
So, are there things that you do outside of that drawing time that kind of act as a counterbalance, or that, or equally, that feed back into your desire to create more work? Are there any things that feed your creativity that aren't actually the creativity itself?
I read a lot. I think that helps, and just, I like technical books. I do read novels as well, but I'm quite a big fan of
Hmm.
Neil Gaiman. But I've got really nice books about making my own ink. Just really technical, boring to most people, but really nice and easy to sink into books. And I do mostly just draw all the time, though. It's a problem I have. Is even in meetings, I've got to like keep the pens and paper away from me, because I will accidentally sketch.
And what kind of things would you be sketching in that environment?
Probably just the people. Like,
Right.
Just if I'm staring at you for a long time, I'm not weird. I'm just drawing you.
Fantastic. So, okay, a question that I've been fascinated with is that so many people that I speak to, just anecdotally, say they can't draw. And I know for a long time I certainly felt that I couldn't draw. I would love to hear your take on that. What would you say to someone who says, I'm not creative and I can't draw? I can't even draw a stick figure.
It's a tricky one. I've come from my last job was working at school, so as an art and DT technician, and we did lots of drawing with the students in art. So we'd start with the fundamentals, and then we'd use lots of different tricks and techniques to try and help them improve. And it's some students have better coordination than others, I think is the easiest way to explain it. But even those who aren't as coordinated can still improve and get better and better, to the point where they all had a really fantastic self-portrait of themselves. And I think it's not a case of you can't draw, it's a case of, do you want to dedicate enough time to get to the level of that you want to be at with your drawings? So I draw all the time. That's the reason why I've drawn since I can remember. Like, one of my earliest memories is drawing a monster. And you have to spend, there's that man who says you've got to spend 10,000 hours on a skill to get good at it. It's a skill. It's a skill that you have to train. Some people have better hand-eye coordination than others, but you can still improve what you've got to make it better. And there are tips and tricks to do that. So like gridding is a really good way of improving. It's really looking as well. It's improving what you see as well as what your hand responds to. So when you're teaching them how to draw the face, you're really making them look at the lines and the contours that make up the face rather than the shapes and the symbols that they've learned through popular media or things like that. So you don't draw this lemon shape. You're following the curves and contours. And I think that's why breaking the image down with a grid or something like that, squinting your eyes at it so you don't see anything, you just see tone, really, really helps you see the image rather than whatever you've got in your head. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so gridding isn't cheating. And just to be clear, a grid means that you draw a grid onto the image that you're reproducing of squares that are, say, 1 centimeter across and high. And then on a larger piece of paper, you draw another grid, but each square is now, say, 10 centimeters across and up. So the 1 centimeter square, you're drawing that into a 10 centimeter square, and you're trying to replicate, you're just trying to blow it up, but you're translating from one smaller image to create a larger image, just in case anyone's not aware of what we're talking about. And that's not cheating.
No, it's just a tool. It's like that's like, if people say that's cheating, then rubbing things out is cheating. Go hard or go home. Draw with a pen without an underdrawing. It's not cheating. It's a tool to help you see better. It just helps you focus your eye on one little section, and instead of getting distracted by all of this shape and all of this extra detail. And you can scale up your grid as well. So if you start at a centimeter grid for your actual drawing bit, then try next time with a 4 centimeter grid, then go to 8, and then eventually you can see well enough to use no grid, or maybe just so that you get the outline and the proportion right for blowing things up. I learned it when I was on an internship in my university archaeological internship, and that's where I learned the stippling technique I do, and also different ways to accurately render an object. So measuring, the gridding, and things like that. You can, like, a viewfinder is just a grid. You know, where you see people painting plain with a little rectangle and some lines. That's a grid. It's all just help you get better at drawing.
I love the idea of making that a progression, which I never would have thought of doing, of using the grid, but then making the actual squares larger as you go, as you develop your eye, as you say it, which is why I think that's a
Yeah.
great way of going about it. Um, so then, kind of on the flip of that, 'cause that's on the technique side, and look how you look at things. I'm wondering if you feel like drawing affects the way that you think because of the like I don't know where I'm going with this question, but I feel like perhaps that the way by changing the way we look at the world and the focus with which we're using, and we're going through a process of translation. You're taking what you see and then you're translating
Hmm.
it through your vision and then out through your hands or whatever you're using to draw with onto another medium. Does that in any way, are you aware of any way in which that changes the way that you think about the world or what you're looking at?
I think it's made me more observant in general and more knowledgeable. So like I just notice things now, and you'll notice like the shadow on someone's face, the way the light hits them. I notice like animals in bushes, and I also through drawing all these animals, I'm a lot better at identifying them. So I'm an awful bird watcher, but I try my best. But the ones I've drawn, I can positively ID now. It's an excellent memory aid, and that's I think in the very factual sense that it is a memory aid,
Mm.
sort of links back to my interest in memory as well. It does fix it in the mind. It's the easiest way for me to learn, like learning patterns, learning shapes, and just any information. If I draw it down, it's why people remember things they write down as well,
Ah.
because just that the the process of just going through and actually physically writing it down, I think it acts as an anchor in your brain for the information. Yeah.
One of the reasons we're having this conversation is because you won this prize by Jackson's Art. What was it like to decide to compete, to enter something into the competition? And how did you go about choosing what to enter?
Um, Entering competition is really it. It's you got to be brave. I think I feel it does stress me out. Like it winds my anxiety right up, even though I know like that nobody's actually judging you personally. But it's I think it helps that the Jackson's Emerging Artist Prize was free to enter, and you get five entry submissions, if you get what I mean. So you can submit five pieces. That takes a lot of the pressure off, because a lot of them they're only £15, but you still, if you're a skint student, that £15 is a week's dinner. Um, so, and I think I chose the drawing that I did submit because I'm it's my I'm so proud of it. Like
Mm.
it is one of my most accomplished drawings. And I just thought, right, do it, submit. It's going to cost you nothing financially. It shouldn't cost you anything emotionally. Submit and see what you get. And I wasn't expecting to win, but I'm really, really happy to have won. It's nice to have that sort of somebody else likes it.
Yeah, that external validation.
Yeah.
And would you have any advice for anyone who is considering entering their work into a competition?
Just submit it. You got not well, I say you got nothing to lose. You got £15 to lose max. Just submit. See, I submit for my local open exhibition. My one of my local galleries does um an open exhibition. I always submit for that. I've got in a few times, so that's nice. It's a fantastic way of a fantastic piece of exposure. People can see your work. Like I've got this interview from it, and I did another interview um for it, and just it's one of it. If you'll get something out of it, even if it's just the confidence of putting your work out
Mm.
there for others to see. It's such a good thing to do.
So a lot of the material that you've been exploring is animals, but I know that you have an interest in people as well.
Yeah.
Hey, and that you're working on some projects coming up. Can you tell us about one of those?
So one of my recent ones, me and my family have been work carers for my great uncle who passed away recently, and during his last probably 10 years of his life, he had vascular dementia, and his memory gradually deteriorated, and with that, his personality deteriorated as well. And it's almost like losing a life before the life is actually lost. So all of these memories of he's a really interesting man. He worked for BT and he traveled the country, and he's got all of these, and he's got memories of generations further back that we don't know of, that are just gone now because his memories went and he's gone. So it's sort of sparking a need to hold on to as much as I can from the family. So I'm collecting things from my father, I'm collecting memories of my mother while they are still, cognizant and able to tell me things. So my dad has brain damage as well, which affects his memory. And as part of his therapy, he goes to creative writing sessions and he writes stories down, and he also writes down stories from mine and my siblings' childhood, stories from how he met my mum, things like that. So I'm just trying to collect his first person accounts of these, and also creating, that's why I did my paintings of my dad over the summer last year, is to create these images of him. So I like to just sit in the living room and quickly sketch them while they're watching the telly or just little things like that, photograph them, video, just get as much as I can from them while I can. And they quite like being drawn as well. They're quite vain, like having portraits of themselves. So it's a very personal project, and I think it would be personal for lots of people as well, because dementia is such one of the biggest issues in society as the population ages. It's it touches everyone almost, or nearly everyone.
Absolutely, yeah. And are you engaging in a similar process of observation and note taking, or is it going through the sketching process?
I've been sketching, but I've been thinking of starting a journal. Might not be able to commit to a daily one because I'm lazy, but I think a weekly one, or even just a notable sort of like, this happened. If something notable happens, write that down. Because is it important if I write down Mum had porridge today? Or little things. Yeah, I think maybe it's the early stages of the project, and this is always the trickiest part, working it out and working out what you want to do. And I flap a lot of trying to work out. So I think I got into the sketching and drawing stage a lot earlier than I usually would. And because usually I'd mess around, like, just want to say I'd fanny around and do just couldn't decide on what I want to do, but I just decided, right, just draw and something will come from it. So that's what I'm doing now.
And I think there's something lovely about a lovely parallel with dementia and the way that you describe it, of sort of losing a life before you actually lose the life, the gradual decline that occurs, in the same way that you're talking about, say, grinding the lithographic stone, or the way that a bird will slowly erode and disappear. And there's a really interesting through line there in all of those images or observations, which then brings us right back to memory as a way of what is left. Once we lose all of those things, what's left really is memory. And there's something lovely about a drawing being such a personal expression of that memory or observation, because it's you observing and translating that into something else. It's not a photograph. It's more specific. And then the I want to say the lens, but the focus that you put into those observations then change what comes out, and the amount of focus that you're putting into those sketches or those drawings and those observations then translate in what you're making, because your drawings are absolutely beautiful, and they do carry a stillness and a beauty, but there is also I'm not sure if sadness is quite the right word, but there's a
melancholy.
Yes, melancholy is a great word for it, a great word. But also, I love this tangible ghost. There's a sense that there was something there that's now gone, And so I guess that's where the melancholy comes from, is because we identify, you can see in the work that there was something here that is no longer, but what is missing is really hard to pin down. It's some ineffable quality. And that's really lovely. So I encourage everyone to have a look at your work, because it is absolutely wonderful. So Kathryn, before we go, do you have a challenge for listeners that they could take away and have a go at doing themselves in their own practice or in their own work?
I do. I thought a lot about this. So I thought my challenge would be, and you can work it around your daily life as well. So mine would be based on my commute, because that is where I get most of my ideas from, but you can base it on your day as well. So like I did with my Bypass Wildlife project, walk a section of your commute. So it doesn't have to be on the day that you're going to work, just take the time out, walk a section and document what you see, photograph, write, make notes of how you feel as you're walking or what you've seen as you're walking. Just engage with the environment that you travel through on a daily basis. This is something that you'd overlook. It will develop your looking skills, what you see, what you notice, and just engage with your environment. And then if you do spot things like birds or that, take the images and identify them, and then you're building up your knowledge database as well. I think just be present in your environment, whether it's your home life or your work life. Something that would be tedious and irritating going to work, try and engage with the environment you go through for that.
I love the idea of the two aspects of that. One is building it into something that you're already doing, so you don't have to make a special trip or a special effort to go and do something that you wouldn't normally do. It's already incorporated into the natural rhythm of your life. But secondly, asking people to go deeper into those things that might be tedious. That's a great word that you used, because it's possible when things become routine that they can feel onerous, and we can zone out, and we can miss the potential beauty or interest in whatever that is. It's a lovely call to encourage people to refocus and see if they can find something stimulating or interesting or beautiful in whatever that space is that they're going to be doing anyway. And that's fantastic. And I think that's what creativity is finding those things, those interests or curiosities in the everyday, and then pulling them out and then sharing them. And I think that's just a great way of kicking people off in that direction. That's a brilliant challenge.
Yeah, I think if you do get sad on your commute from the fact that you have to work, it might just help you get through the day. If you just spend even if it's just like 10 minutes of just thoughtfulness, or it's almost like those mindfulness techniques that you do. It's really therapeutic.
Wonderful. Oh, Kathryn, this has been so much fun talking to you. It's really stimulating and invigorating, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. It's just been great, and I really, really encourage people to look at your work. So where can people see more of your work or follow your latest projects and see more about what you're doing?
I have a website at www.kathrynpoole.co.uk, or you can follow me on Instagram at Kathryn Poole Art.
And that's Kathryn with a Y and Poole with an E at the end.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll put links to that in the show notes. So if anyone's interested, they can click on them right there. Kathryn, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that process with us.
Thank you very much for having me on. It has been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Hey there. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode of The Practical Creative. If you'd like to learn more about Kathryn and her work, you can visit the Practical Creative website at thepracticalcreative.life, where you'll find links to all of her materials. And if you'd like to have a go at Kathryn's challenge of documenting your commute, you can find a written version on the Creative Challenges page. You can also sign up to receive my challenge packs, where I've collated all of the challenges from my guests in seasons 1 and 2 of the podcast into downloadable PDFs. Just head over to the website and check it out. Also, be sure to have a look at the resources page, where I've compiled links to all the materials and services referenced by my guests, including books they've written on creativity and business, online courses, Facebook groups, and much, much more. And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Practical Creative Podcast, it would be fantastic if you would subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and even leave a review on iTunes. I'd also love to hear what you found to be exciting, inspiring, or even challenging about these conversations. You can find me on Instagram at Practical Creative. Until next time.